I will say to guys, take a beautiful woman's, Ukrainian woman's Instagram, or just take her phone in general, any social media site she's on, boom, there'll be 20, 30 simp messages per day telling how beautiful she is, like her fans basically, because that's the way she's going to treat them, her fans, not possible suitors, writing to her non-stop. And then maybe there's one or two guys that she becomes interested in who hit her up and they slide into her DMs. But basically she's discoverable without doing anything. Привет and welcome to another Vodka Vodcast with me, Connor Client. And boy, is this going to be a controversial one. So strap yourselves in, let's get going. Greetings first of all from Kherson, which is quite an appropriate city to shoot this video in, because I think after obviously Kiev and Odessa, Scam Central, Odessa, Mama, Mykolaiv, a city an hour up the road, and here in Kherson have been the cities marketed for the traditional bride industry in Ukraine, probably the most. So it's probably good that I'm standing here right in the city center. This is the pedestrian street. It's called Suvorova, after the Russian general. I think that might be a statue over there just off camera. And yes, you did read it correctly, the title. We're going to discuss today the demise of the Ukrainian mail order bride industry. You know, I had this idea of making this video for a while. I thought to think about what I'm going to say in this video, and then this morning I went to a YouTube channel that promotes romance tours here in Ukraine. Now, they don't actually promote them really here in Kherson. Seems like other cities have come into the mix. Can discuss that a little bit also later on in the video. Cities in the center of Ukraine like Dnipro and Zaporozhye. And it really is on cue for this video, ironically. So I'm going to read a part from it. Let me just pull it up here on my phone. It's actually, the first comment is written by a guy who actually regularly comments on my videos as well. And basically, he's talking about Russian girl videos. He puts it in inverted commas, but it's pertinent also really to here in Ukraine. In the interviews, you can tell the girls are no longer marriage material. They freely admit they like to party. They can't answer which country has the best looking guys. They can't answer what type of guy do you want. They can't answer what is love. They've never thought about these questions because they are busy in former Soviet bloc countries being with a different guy every week. So I don't know what the destiny is for these agencies. No marriageable girls around anymore. Now he's talking to this inverted commas, of course, mail order bride industry that centers on Ukraine and Eastern Europe, but also to a certain extent with Russia. And then there's a comment on below it, and I think this guy may have even commented on some of my videos as well, and he says, you have to wait until they turn 35 or 40 and she has a kid by another man. Then she'd be ready for you, buddy. And actually that is just spot on with what I'm going to discuss in today's podcast. So what those two commenters have kind of hit the nail on the head about is that these marriage agents, as we call them, they can only help really Western guys meet women who are 35, 40 and already have kids from a previous relationship. And obviously the father of those children is no longer very relevant in their life, and they need a surrogate father, basically. That is what it's reduced to in terms of the type of client they can help. Sure, I'm not saying that makes the woman a bad person, of course, and that she can't be helped in finding a Western guy who might be a good match, still a good trade-off. But you know, traditionally this agency has relied on the stunning, youthful beauty of the women here in Ukraine, and the fact that they all want to have, meet a good man and get married and have a traditional family and all this kind of shebang. But there you see two guys are obviously very heavily invested in this, completely dismissing it since they watch all this kind of content. I guess they're particularly interested in the topic. And part of the reason I foresee the demise of this industry is like, for how much longer are these agencies going to be able to help even those guys match with single moms in their late 30s, early 40s? Because things are changing quite rapidly. I've seen big changes here in Ukraine. I have a video about that, a podcast. I'll link it up above in a card down below in the description. The big changes I've seen, the big 10 changes I've seen in the last 10 years here. So with all these technological changes, new opportunities in terms of travel, the economic, obviously, development of Ukraine, for how much longer can these agencies even help these older gentlemen, I'm assuming, meet the single moms who are in their late 30s, mid to late 30s, early 40s, who have obviously children, that's why they're single moms, with other men who are not relevant in their life. I mean, for how much longer are they going to be even able to help those guys? That is why I foresee the demise of the industry. And when I say demise, I mean it will go back to something that is basically normal, normal, because it's abnormal what's been going on, with all this whole industry around it. It will become just like matchmaking, say in the West, where you have matchmakers, but they're helping very specific people who have difficulties maybe being on a dating app, going out and socializing, and meeting. They have maybe very high demands in a partner and stuff like that. And it's very, very kind of niche, because you have those legitimate people in the West who can help people. But this whole industry, massive, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars of annual revenue of this industry. If you take the greater, runs into billions. If you take the greater industry around Russian, Eastern European women and marriage, I can't see it continuing, definitely not legitimately. And now let's get into the reasons why this demise, why it's been demising, and why it's going to become a normal industry. So first of all, it's important to look at the history of this mail order bride industry here in Ukraine. Now, in the 1990s, early 90s, the Soviet Union dissolved, collapsed, the economy collapsed in the former Soviet Socialist republics, which became independent countries like Ukraine here. And there was mass unemployment, mass poverty. A lot of men died, early deaths, pretty commonly because of alcoholism, maybe suicide, I'm not really sure, but alcoholism is given as one of the big reasons. So it's a pretty desperate situation here. On top of that, it was very hard to travel abroad as a Ukrainian citizen, as a Russian citizen, whatever, and actually go to, say, Western Europe, where the economy is obviously doing a lot better, or North America, to go to America. It was pretty darn hard to get there, right? Just the cost of travel, needing visas, obviously it was very impoverished here. Communication, even knowing much about those countries. And in stepped an industry that tried to match Western men, based primarily, with enough money, with the ladies here in, say, Ukraine. Ukraine was kind of the biggest country, but also Russia, other parts of the former Soviet Union. Actually, when I look back at the history, there actually was this kind of cottage industry, I guess, around matchmaking Westerners with women in Central Europe, so countries like, Czech Republic, Poland, even into the Balkans, Romania. Now, you don't see, in the early days of the internet, I can't really find much about it now, but it did exist to a certain extent also there. Now it's completely disappeared. That's a harbinger of what's going to happen in this country, I believe. Anyways, we're making this video in August 2021. We can see in 10 years, look back at it. So, just one final point, mail order bride industry. It was never actually mail order bride. That's a complete misnomer. No one is going to like a menu and selecting, eye color, hair color, blonde 35, or probably 22, blue eyes, 1.80 m, putting in their criteria, and out pops a Ukrainian bride who's then shipped off to America in a box. Obviously that would be human trafficking, and that's not what we're referring to here. We're referring to this kind of, we'll call it, they have several names, marriage agencies, romance tour companies, even I guess some dating coaches with who have matchmaking in between. So it's basically, I would say that we're talking about people who put people in contact between the two countries using a website primarily, right? And then they come over and they help these tours if the guy decides to come over. So it's kind of a little bit nebulous exactly what's in the industry now, but in terms of describing, it's a little bit imprecise maybe, but if you've been hanging out here, you know exactly the kind of stereotype. The stereotype you always would have seen in the past is maybe an American guy between the ages of 40 and 60, looking a little bit out of place. Normally his dress sense in a city like Odessa, and with normally two women with him, one always being the interpreter, because yes, they always need an interpreter that they need to pay for. It's going to be part of, obviously the way to make money with this guy, and then the bride to be supposedly is usually considerably younger, than the guy who's come from the West, and they're sitting there and they're having dinner at an expensive table, expensive restaurant normally. That is kind of the stereotype that you would see in person here, right? So why is it going to disappear, or at least become a normal situation, not an abnormal situation here? So first of all, economic turmoil. Ukrainian economy, of course, it has been hit in the last, since 2014 with the war with Russia, the annexation of Crimea, all that. But things here in the last couple of years have gotten dramatically better. And it's not just that the overall GDP rates might have, I don't know, narrowed or not narrowed. It's kind of the standard of living that you can have here, just in terms of, because I've been spending obviously most of the last few years in Eastern Europe, and particularly in Ukraine. I've been here for the last 18 months straight. Like the inconveniences, and it's in my other video, the other podcast, like I would have experienced 10 years ago coming to Ukraine versus the West, they don't really exist anymore. There's not much of a difference for me. I mean, the roads are terrible and they are making some progress in that, but outside of a few small things, it's not the dramatic difference. It's definitely not the 1990s where there's this widespread poverty and everything had collapsed and disorder. In general, I would say it's safer in Ukrainian cities to walk around at night than most cities in Western Europe and North America. The difference in terms of getting the same standard compared to in the West. I mean, obviously you need to relatively have more money here, of course, but you can get that without much of a problem. It's freely available. The information nowadays just travels so much quicker. So I would say the economic malaise that we saw in the 1990s, it's not there to the same extent. Now, of course, there is obviously an economic difference, but it's not as dramatic as it used to be. And I think also the perception that everybody's rich in the West or America and everybody's poor in Ukraine, except for maybe the the oligarchic elite, that's kind of changed also. Women realize that not everybody's rich in America. A lot of people obviously have a big middle class, and a lot of guys, their actual quality of life is not actually any better than, say, a maybe slightly above average guy in Ukraine, especially when you have to take into account that they got to move country. So the first big reason is the economic situation has improved dramatically here. So you don't have that gulf like you used to have in the 1990s at least. And of course that changes the incentive to just marry someone very quickly or move to another country with someone maybe you don't know very well and has a very different culture that maybe isn't going to gel in the long term with your values from the woman's point of view here in Ukraine. So the second big change that impacts the marriage agency and mail order bride industry here is the technological changes. So there's something called Instagram. There's another thing called Tinder. Very simple to use. In your pocket, Tinder, swiping left, swiping right. Obviously Instagram, you're able to also market yourself as a woman, especially from here, and you're discoverable. So there are just a few keywords to start this section off on, because I think this is one of the most important ones. Back in the 1990s, I mean, the internet wasn't really a thing, I guess, and then when it started, it was very, very basic, of course, and it was hard to meet that Western guy in the West, if you were here in Ukraine, and obviously for the Western guy to actually meet women or arrange to meet women without having to fly over here blind, without knowing the culture, the language, and really having information what was going on in Ukraine. And also these marriage sites eventually started really heavily marketing and branding Ukrainian women as these kind of like model goddess type Stepford wives who just want to cook and clean for their man in the West, good man in the West. And they all look like supermodels, basically, and they're all willing to just marry some random guy 40 years older than them, of course, to get to America and get that green card girl, whatever, right? So nowadays, what happens? Well, they can meet men from all over the world with Tinder, and guys from all over the world are changing their PIN and claiming they're already in Ukraine just to check out, swiping, talking to them. So, and then you've got obviously Instagram, which allows a girl, even in a small village here, to be discovered by local guys here in Ukraine from another city or from another part of the world, like over in London, New York, Paris, or even over in Tokyo, in Australia and Sydney, the Middle East, in Dubai, saying they can all talk to them and discover them. That wasn't possible before. So they kind of, I guess, advantage these, and I'm talking of course about the legitimate marriage agencies in a sense that ones who are actually trying to connect people. Well, before they kind of had almost monopoly online. Like it was very hard to meet someone from another country and start that relationship compared to now when you have dating apps like Tinder and people can just swipe and talk to and connect with people from all over the world. On top of it, Instagram, even if the girl hasn't actually gone onto a dating site and made any effort, she just gets, I will say to guys, take a beautiful woman's, Ukrainian woman's Instagram, or just take her phone in general, any social media site she's on, boom, there'll be 20, 30 simp messages per day telling how beautiful she is, like her fans basically, because that's the way she's going to treat them, her fans, not possible suitors, writing to her non-stop. And then maybe there's one or two guys that she becomes interested in who hit her up and they slide into her DMs, but basically she's discoverable without doing anything. So this is massive, right? So what marriage agencies or romance tours are always trying to sell their clients is that they have, vetted this database of girls or whatever who are interested in meeting foreign guys. Now imagine, because of the ease of access, right? In terms of connecting or contacting or democratization of it, right? It can basically be for free on Instagram or very small fee on Tinder. What kind of women are actually going to go to a marriage agency and look for a Western husband to escape this country? It's not going to be the hottest of the hottest. It's not going to be the women who are 22 and have, at their, whether it's 22, 20 or 25 and are looking at their best in terms of looks, which is what those guys are most attracted to, visuals. So the first thing we basically look at. And on a dating site, that's all you're basically, or dating app, or just Instagram, it's what attracts us just visually. Like what kind of women are going to go there? It's the women who are not getting hit up regularly, who, like every woman can go on Tinder. It's a lot less effort than going to a matchmaking service or to a dating agency where they have to go in and do an interview. They can just put up their Tinder, right? So it's women that don't meet high quality men that way that are going to be interested in going to marriages. Now, that is why the commenter under the romance tour video said that there are no marriageable women, that it's only the 35, I don't know what he said, 30 to 45, whatever, in this range bracket, single moms are going to go because they have an incentive. That's the reason they're considered lower value on the dating market because they are older, they're past their peak normally, and they have kids in tow. And just for men in general, we see that is less attractive as a proposition than obviously a woman who doesn't have children, who's 20, 25, 28, 30, whatever, right? So they're the only women who are going to go there in the first place. Now, here is the big reveal. I have a consulting client and he has shown me what is available on, I would say, one of the most reputable romance tour matchmaking services of Ageable. He has shown me behind the scenes what's there, and there was hardly a woman under 30. I think it was around 5% of the women were under 30. So that kind of confirms that, like, the women under 30 are just not interested in going. And even those under 30, there was one who looked like a 19-year-old model. I said, did you select her? He's like, no, because she seems too young for me. My client was about 40, who was now taking me for coaching because he's already dramatically basically failed with all these marriage agencies because they don't historically have a very high success rate, which is no surprise because he's actually looking for women under 30 without kids. I was like, well, first of all, his entire database is 5%, only 5% under it. And then when he has to be matched with these women who were, there were a few women who were quite good looking, very young compared to the rest of them, like 19, 20, 22. None of them answered. So there you can see that the legitimate options that are doing that are, outside of that 30 plus single mom bracket, almost completely none. And then on top of it, the pièce de résistance. There was a woman that he recognized on Tinder from the database that he had not selected. I think he thought she was a bit too young for him, but I don't remember exactly why, because I asked him, why didn't you just select her from the dating sites and you paid all this money, right, for these dates? Or she hadn't accepted his request or whatever, right? So he met her off Tinder. And he went out with her and they slept together. And you know what she told him? She told him she's not really interested in a long-term relationship. And then he said, that you're on this dating site? I am? Really? Yeah, I remember I signed up to a different site before, and I guess they just passed on my profile. She had no idea she was even on this site, and he met her on Tinder. and he slept with her. So why the hell would you be paying to meet that kind of woman on a marriage agent dating site? So basically, that is a very great display why it's basically over, because in the 1990s, I think legitimately he could have met those women at a marriage agency or a romance tour site, because there were women who didn't have the same options. They couldn't go on Tinder, and the world was a very different place. On top of it, I did a different romance tour company. I did also have a client once, a couple of when I started out first, and he had actually already paid to go on some romance tour. It might even have been here in Kherson, not entirely sure. He went around the region, right? And he only really had a connection with one girl. So he paid for 10 dates or whatever, and then there was a connection with one. But I mean, that probably makes it legitimate. I actually met her. She seemed like she was not a scammer or something like that, right? And there was nothing between them. And then recently, I noticed that she's kind of marketing herself for, interesting additional services on Instagram. She's using Instagram and other sites. Apparently, just her profile looked very different. Didn't look like a Stepford wife. That's basically all I will say about that. So that was type of, and this is a girl who's again under 30 and has options. Listen, they are not going to marriage agencies to find a husband. Hardly anything. It's no more than they would in the West. That's basically what I want to communicate. What's been confirmed to me by speaking to the few guys who become my coaching clients who had already tried these marriage agencies. 34 degrees Celsius here in Kherson. Come for the weather, not for the brides. So the third thing is travel. Travel has transformed the travel industry. I know we're still in this COVID travel mess. It's August 2021, but actually there are guys traveling a lot more normally than they were last year already. But this is the big change. Like 20 years ago, obviously, it was a lot more expensive. There weren't the low-cost airlines. Here, it was just a lot more expensive relative to the income to buy a flight and actually go traveling. On top of that, they needed visas for Schengen. Now they don't need a Schengen visa. Schengen is the area that's not 100% correlating with the European Union, but more or less, we'll say. They can go to lots of countries like France, Germany, Italy, Norway, which is not in the EU, but part of the Schengen area, for 3 months every 6 months. It's 90 days every 180 without a visa. It's a lot easier to travel. And what does that mean? Well, they meet guys from other countries when they travel abroad. They're not sitting here waiting for a white knight to fly in and save them from terrible Ukraine. Also because of the economic situation and stuff. Girls don't really want to actually leave Ukraine. They like to travel because they can go on a trip, but they're not necessarily desperate to get out of Ukraine. And the girls who were desperate to leave, they've already gotten a plane and gone to Dubai or somewhere else, or to Paris or Firenze in Italy, Florence in Italy, or somewhere else long ago. They're not hanging around here. They're not trapped, basically. They can travel. And also, I guess, there are a lot more Western guys traveling here anyways. It's not that unusual. I mean, when I was coming here 10 years ago, outside of Odessa and Kiev, like even when I went to Crimea back in the day, I hardly saw any Westerners. Now, Crimea is obviously occupied by Russia. It's been annexed. It's de jure Ukraine, but de facto administered by Russia, and not so many Westerners are going in, I guess. But coming to Kherson or another city like Kharkiv, the second city, you will see 3, 4, 5 times more foreigners than you did 10 years ago. So also the foreign guys are here. So that's another big change that has occurred in the last while that just makes, why do you need a marriage agency when you can fly to the source yourself? Of course, it's hard for them to get American visas. And actually, I would say, I'm going to make a video about this as well, that the star power of America has actually dropped off quite a bit in the last 5 years compared to the reaction that my American buddies who came with me used to get. Now, they don't get anything like the same reaction from American. I think for being a Western or in general, they're just not as interested. They meet so many of them. There's nothing unique about it. There isn't this kind of like fairy tale story for them just because they meet a guy from Manchester who's here at a stag party weekend, right? That doesn't happen. Never mind all the guys from Turkey or the Middle East, Israel or wherever, also part of the Middle East, that come in here. And so basically travel is making a big difference. On top of that, I would say the level of English has changed. Now, I referred to the fact that they used to that marriage agents make quite a good bit of money, or the industry around it makes a good bit of money from interpretation. The idea was, well, girls here, women here don't speak very good English, so if you come as a Western guy, because they assume you don't learn Russian or Ukrainian, that you need an interpreter to be there in all the dates. First of all, that is creepy. Why would you want a third wheel at all your dates? Really not conducive to getting to know someone very well. Now today, of course, you got technology, you got Google Translate. So first of all, if she doesn't speak English, then you can use that, and that's actually a lot of fun to use. You definitely don't need an interpreter to be there. That is odd. That is kind of, as I said at the outset, the stereotype of the mail order bride industry or marriage agency victim of sitting there paying for the interpreter, paying for the meal, probably then buying her presents. So on top of that, the level of English has increased quite dramatically with younger women now, even probably amongst women who are 30, 40 years of age as well compared to before. But having said that, it is dramatically better than 10 years ago. It was really rare where I met a woman who didn't work in the travel industry or wasn't an interpreter for a marriage agency who spoke very good English. You do meet those women today. They have more an incentive, they travel a lot more, and just English has become the world's global lingua franca even more. So English is more spoken, and that also makes one of the revenue sources for the marriage agencies less legitimate. And most guys should figure out they don't need an interpreter. So that's another thing hitting the marriage agency business here. And the final point that I want to raise and explain to you that's contributing towards the demise of the mail order bride industry here in Ukraine in particular is channels like mine. Not only channels like mine, you know, even the marriage agency Romance Tours channels, and there's kind of a new wave of them being run by guys from the West. Some of these guys actually met their wives through a marriage and then decide, hey, this is good business, let me also get in it. I mean, they had success with it. And then you have the guys who had no success with it but still go and start some sort of matchmaking service. Yeah, apparently they weren't able to go home afterwards, even though they failed, and they kind of pitched that as, yeah, why, I always say, why would you trust someone who failed doing it and couldn't succeed and meet their wife on a marriage agency, and then they pitch it to you? But okay, it seems to work for them. Other guys seem to trust them in spite of their own failings. So yeah, it's channels like this, and I have to say, even those, they give way better information than the kind of more super scammy, like obviously PPL sites. That's, if you don't know what it's, a pay per letter site where they have this kind of, they're using technology, they're using in translators, the guys are writing and paying per message. That's when it's pay per letter. And they're selling this dream of Stepford wife, you know, whatever. Not even maybe the 20-year-old model anymore, but even a 30-year-old one single mom who just wants to love them and whatever stuff, and they're paying per message and they're getting scammed. But this, these kind of channels that give you better information allow the Western guys to realize that it's not what it's cracked up to be. Ukrainian women in general are no longer this Stepford wife. They don't aspire to be a Stepford wife, cook and clean for some guy 30 years older than them sitting in Ohio or something like that. Maybe in the 90s, I guess they did, because the situation was so bad here and they didn't have themselves so much information. But channels like mine and other channels that give you the real truth about what it's like in Ukraine let you know that basically a large part of this industry is just scamming Western men, the PPL industry, the paper letter in particular, but also the success rates of even the more genuine matchmakers. I mean, but if you're looking for a woman under 30 without kids, they really can't. It's not the place to go to. Save your money and invest in coaching. And actually coming over here and actually spending a large part of the year here, you'll be almost certainly a lot more successful than, yeah, going to specifically a matchmaker. Even one of those marriage agency owners or matchmakers, he even says himself, the guys who do the best are the guys who move here. Like, he moved here, he does have a wife, but he didn't meet her at a matchmaking service. he was the owner of a matchmaking service. He's a businessman that has a lot more status here, believe me. So he was successful because he moved here, even though it's a little bit incongruent with him having that agency, but at least he's candid enough to say what it is. Guys who do the best move here. So basic information, I think, makes a big difference. And going forward, realizing what the reality is here. Well, you know, it kind of goes from both sides. You have the women who are not as interested in, first of all, meeting foreign men in general, because they have ease of access and they don't have the same incentives to go, and unless they, of course, have kids and they're over 35 here. Yeah, at least when they come and they start approaching it, they're in a better shape and they're more knowledgeable and they're less likely to get scammed. Now, it does happen, unfortunately, a lot, or they're more likely to realize this is not the best way to do it, and they might as well either go somewhere else, which is, I guess, also to do with YouTube channels and information. Like now you see, I mean, we've always had this Thai mail order bride stereotype, but Southeast Asia is probably a better place for those guys who are traditionally going here. Now they have the information that actually, if you read any of their forums or comments under their videos and stuff from romance tours, they basically tell them, listen, if this is what you want a 30-year age gap with some woman who wants to be a Stepford wife, don't come to Eastern Europe. Go to Southeast Asia. I had a guy once pay me for a consulting call about a woman that he was dating online here that he met on a website that was charging him obviously for the connection. And yeah, he was on my Facebook afterwards because we connected. And I saw in the end, he just went to Southeast Asia, and he apparently got what he's looking for. He was with a dramatically younger woman from there. So it just seems like that is the better place to head to. On top of it, I even watched some pickup artistry channels or guys who give dating advice, how to meet women, just walking around the streets and stuff. And it was kind of amusing to watch one of them because he said, forget Ukraine. He said, it's so hard here. They're not really interested in Western guys. You have to make so much effort. There are better places to go in the world if you want to meet women easily and quicker. He also confirmed it that, you know, this idea that they're all desperately sitting here waiting for you as a Western white knight to come and take them away. There's a few of those women, but not very many. And they're easy to find by other guys. So marriage agency is probably not where you're going to meet them. So just as a final point, as kind of denouement to the video, here in Ukraine, scams that happen, whether they happen to happen to a marriage agency, a romance tour, or PPL site, or just in general when tourists get scammed out of money, Ukrainian authorities don't do very much to help in general compared to other countries. One of my consulting clients is actually shocked. He said, how can they let this happen? It destroys the reputation of, hey, привет, спасибо. The guy wearing a t-shirt, her son had some boxing team, so boxer. And he was shocked, but how can they let the branding of the country be tarnished by all these scams? And I said, they don't care. They don't care. They think these guys who get scams are basically idiots. They're foreign idiots to come in. And of course, our girls, as they would say, nashi devushki, they just take all their money. So what? They're going to spend it here. They don't see the downside. And you know, these PPL sites that have been scamming guys online with the letter writing, they pump that money back into the marketing, right? And a different branding for the country, the traditional wife, Stepford wife branding, right? If the Ukrainian government collectively starts to take scams seriously and comes down, like what happened in Belarus when they tried to do the same stuff in Belarus, well, Belarus is a country that's effectively a police state. That has a lot of disadvantages. We've seen that in the last year. But one of maybe the upsides to a police state is like when you have scams and stuff, believe me, they get taken very serious in Belarus. And there's no scammy marriage agencies there. You actually need a license, first of all, to even open one. And there's very few given by the government. So they basically cannot operate. I heard a story through the grapevine that one of the agencies in Ukraine tried to organize something in Belarus. It happened once. They were apparently told in no uncertain circumstances not to return, right? It was not going to be tolerated there. And they weren't even, I would say, they're not a PPL site, at least they actually host an event. So I think in grosso modo, if Ukraine, which is on a pathway towards closer ties to the West and needs to improve its rule of law overall, if they clamp down on this, we will see it disappear very quickly, and it will go back to a completely normal situation in terms of matchmaking, marriage agencies, or the mail order bride industry in the long run. And the reason why I feel more confidence in saying, I can't predict 100%, maybe they're going to find new ways to rebrand the Ukrainian bride market or whatever. They're creative people, they have a lot of money that they're making from it apparently. So, but I look at Central Europe, I look at Romania, as I said, just to come back to that, there were attempts to do that in the past there. And what happened? Well, the economic situation improved in those countries, rule of law is stronger, and we don't hear about, you don't hear Czech brides being marketed, you don't hear Polish brides being marketed, you don't hear Romanian brides being marketed on the internet, you hear Ukrainian brides, you hear Russian brides, and now you hear from other regions. But in we'll say Central Eastern Europe, it's only here. And why? You don't even hear about Belarusian brides that much. Why? Because you can't run a scam industry, right? So I predict it will happen the same as it happened in the other countries. Anyways, in the meantime, write me below what you think about the mail order bride industry here. As I said, it's a complete misnomer. It's actually more a matchmaking, romance tour industry that, you know, doesn't have a very good reputation in general. And its demise, or my prediction of its demise, and becoming just normal in terms of how we'll have matchmaking in the future around this country, and hopefully complete new rebanding about amazingly free Ukraine in the last 18 months of this coronavirus mayhem. On top of that, make sure that you're on my free mailing list. I put down below the 5 biggest mistakes made by Western guys when they come here to date the beautiful and sincere women of Eastern Europe, because most women here are not scammers, and this is unfortunately a byproduct of a lot of this industry that, you know, that it's not only, to be fair, to be completely fair, it's not only centered in this industry, but just in general, there's a lot of scamming going on because of the lack of rule of law here. And unfortunately, that affects the image of the country, as my client pointed out. And there are amazing benefits to actually coming here and living part of the year. So definitely be on my free mailing list. You get that free gift anyways, that checklist for the 5 biggest mistakes. And then in the future, you'll get access to my new programs when I launch them. That's why I only open them up to my most loyal fans who are on that mailing list. And yeah, let me know what you think of the mail order bride industry here in Ukraine, whether it's going to, in spite of my prediction, grow, make more money, or is it going to start to recede and become a situation normal here in a few years? And we won't hear about these matchmaking tours or romance tours or PPL sites in the future. Okay, this is Vidania Dopobachna from Kherson. Beautifully hot summer's Kherson in Ukraine. Ciao, ciao.
SAR Experience.